racist police beat, black woman. Then shocked to learn she's a Navy Admiral. The first blow came so fast, Charlene Wade barely had time to brace for it. A hard elbow to her ribs knocked the wind out of her as she stumbled sideways, arms cuffed behind her back, face down against the dusty hood of a patrol car. The street was empty except for the flashing blue and red lights painting the Georgia twilight. Officer Brent Weller's grip on her shoulder was so tight it felt like he was trying to drill through her collarbone. "I told you to stop resisting," he shouted. "I'm not resisting," Charlene said, her voice firm despite the sting in her ribs. Officer Cody Myers yanked her arm back higher, past the natural range of motion. "You people always have something to say." "You people?" she asked, raising one brow, barely hiding her disgust. A crowd hadn't formed yet, just a woman down the street recording with shaky hands, whispering into her phone. But it would go viral before the end of the night. Not that Charlene seemed concerned. Even as blood dripped from the corner of her lip, even as her dress shirt stuck to her back from sweat and bruises, she stared at the cracked pavement like she was measuring her next move. Weller shoved her into the back seat, slamming the door hard. "We'll see how tough she is when she spends a few nights in lockup." He didn't know her name yet, didn't ask. Just saw a black woman in a luxury sedan with out-of-state plates, dressed in tailored civilian clothes, and made assumptions. Charlene sat silently, her pulse steady, her thoughts even steadier. They hadn't checked her license, hadn't looked at the documents in her car. They didn't know who they were dealing with, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Earlier that day, she had landed in Atlanta under a quiet government travel order. No escort, no uniform. She was attending a private memorial for Rear Admiral Stevens, her mentor and one of the few men in the Navy who had ever truly believed in her. She hadn't expected trouble in a rural town like Wayfield. She had only planned to stop for gas. But what she hadn't anticipated was the patrol car pulling a sharp U-turn behind her, sirens blaring, when she turned into a quiet side street to reroute her GPS. No license plate light, Weller had claimed when he approached. Charlene had calmly handed him her papers. That's when his eyes narrowed, and everything changed. "You got some nerve driving a car like this," he'd said, eyeing her black Mercedes. That had been the beginning. Inside the car now, Charlene flexed her fingers subtly behind her back, testing the tightness of the cuffs. Standard issue, over-tightened amateur move. Rookie aggression masking fear. She'd seen it before in war zones, in briefings, in command rooms. The worst kind of danger wasn't chaos. It was ignorance dressed in authority. Back at the precinct, the situation got worse. Weller dragged her through the hallway like she was a threat. She didn't resist, didn't speak, but her eyes scanned everything. Layout, camera angles, who looked up, who looked away. "You're not so quiet now, are you?" Myers said, smirking as he pushed her toward the holding cell. Charlene turned and looked him directly in the eye. "You haven't even told me what I'm charged with." "Interfering, loitering, mouthing off," Weller shrugged. "We'll make it stick." Tamika Jones, a young black officer at the desk, looked up from her screen. Her brow furrowed. "Do we have intake paperwork?" she asked. "Don't need it yet," Myers said. "She's just here for a bit." Tamika's eyes lingered on Charlene for a beat too long. There was something unsettling in Charlene's stillness, like a storm paused midair. Hours passed. They denied her a phone call. They denied her medical attention. She asked once, then said nothing more. But it was enough. Tamika went back to her desk, opened an encrypted internal system, and typed in the name from Charlene's ID, Charlene Ann Wade. Her eyes widened. United States Navy. Rank, Rear Admiral. Clearance, top secret, active duty, assigned to Naval Intelligence Command. She froze. "Hey, Jones," Weller barked from across the room. Run down to booking and grab the new cuffs, the ones that don't loosen. Tamika didn't move. She stared at the screen like it had just spoken to her. Then she glanced toward the holding cell, where Charlene now sat alone on the bench, straight-backed, silent, waiting. "Y'all messed up," Tamika whispered under her breath. Meanwhile, down the road in a small bar with old country songs playing on a dusty jukebox, Mike Donovan, a retired Navy lieutenant, scrolled through his phone. He had just come back from Admiral Stevens's memorial himself. The footage popped up, just 15 seconds of a woman being slammed to the ground. At first, he kept scrolling, but something made him stop and rewind. That jawline, that composure, the way she stayed calm even in chaos. He zoomed in. "Charlene," he whispered. He reached for his phone and pulled up a contact buried deep in his list. "Commander Ellison, Naval Intelligence." The call connected on the first ring. "You need to wake up the Pentagon," Mike said. "Right now." Back at the station, Tamika printed Charlene's profile, tucked it discreetly in her jacket, and walked outside to her car, heart racing. Inside the holding cell, Charlene closed her eyes and leaned back, hearing the whisper of movement behind the walls. It had begun. She hadn't needed to shout. She hadn't needed to threaten. She had simply waited. The system was going to crumble on its own, and when it did, she'd be the one still standing. The only question now was, how many of them would survive it? Not all wars were fought with guns. Some began with silence. Charlene Wade didn't flinch when the cell door creaked open just after 4 a.m. The steel hinges let out a groan that echoed down the empty hallway, followed by 2 sets of footsteps. She kept her gaze forward, her hands clasped together on her lap, the dried smear of blood still on her lower lip. The door swung fully open, and Officer Weller stood there with a paper cup in hand. "Figured you might want some water," he said, his tone flat but laced with something colder than sarcasm. Charlene met his eyes. "Only if it comes with my constitutional rights." He didn't smile, just tossed the cup onto the bench beside her and stepped back, letting Officer Myers slip in behind him. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Myers said, all calm and collected like you got some kind of ace up your sleeve. Charlene didn't answer. Myers crouched down in front of her, his face inches from hers. "You're nobody here, just another loud mouth who doesn't know when to shut up." Charlene tilted her head slightly. "Funny, that's what the Taliban said before we blew their compound to hell." For a second, something shifted in Myers's eyes, a flicker of confusion, like his brain couldn't process what he'd just heard. But Weller grabbed his arm and yanked him back before things could escalate further. "Let's go," Weller muttered. "This is a waste of time." They locked the door again. Charlene exhaled quietly and leaned back. She knew they were unraveling, and she hadn't even made a call set. An hour later, Officer Tamika Jones stood in the parking lot with her phone pressed to her ear, pacing behind her car. "Yes, sir. I ran the ID 3 times. Same result." A pause. "No, they haven't checked her name. They just brought her in like some random suspect off the street." Her voice dropped. "Sir, she's a Navy Admiral, active duty." On the other end of the call, Commander Ellison of Naval Intelligence sat up straighter in his office chair in D.C. "You're certain?" Tamika opened her jacket and glanced at the printed profile she'd tucked into the lining. Charlene Ann Wade, Rear Admiral, clearance level 7. Her face is in every base security manual I've ever read. I thought it was fake at first, but now I'm sure. Ellison didn't hesitate. "Don't speak to anyone else. Stay near her. Do not let them move her. We're sending a team. Now." Tamika hung up and stared at the precinct building in front of her. She didn't know what kind of hell was about to break loose. But she knew one thing: Charlene wasn't the one in danger anymore. By sunrise, the tension in the building was thick enough to cut with a knife. Weller was pacing the bullpen, throwing glances toward the holding cells. Myers scrolled through his phone, reading comments from a newly posted video, 15 seconds of him and Weller shoving a black woman into the back of a cruiser. Over 20,000 views, and rising fast. "Damn it," he muttered. "What?" Weller barked. "This clip. It's already online. The comments are brutal." Weller looked over his shoulder. "We need to get ahead of this. Spin it. Say she was aggressive." "She wasn't." Tamika's voice came from behind them, calm and firm. The two men turned. Tamika stood with her hands on her hips, her tone colder than they'd ever heard. She didn't raise her voice, didn't resist. She asked for a lawyer. "You ignored protocol. You assaulted an unarmed civilian." Weller stepped forward. "Watch yourself, Officer Jones." "I did," she said, locking eyes with him. "That's why I made the call." Weller stiffened. "What call?" Before she could answer, the entire precinct shook with the rumble of black SUVs pulling into the lot. Doors slammed, boots hit pavement. In walked 3 men in dark suits, followed by 2 Navy officers in full uniform. Commander Ellison strode through the doors like he owned the place. He didn't need to flash a badge. His posture did it for him. "I want Admiral Wade released, immediately," he said. Dead silence. Weller's mouth opened, then closed. Myers stumbled forward. "Admiral?" Commander Ellison narrowed his eyes. "You didn't check her ID, did you?" Weller tried to salvage what he could. She didn't identify herself as military." "She didn't have to," Ellison said sharply. "You had her license, her documents, and instead you chose to act on assumptions. Now you've assaulted a flag officer of the United States Navy. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" No one spoke. Ellison turned to Tamika. "Thank you, Officer Jones. You did the right thing." Tamika nodded, silent but steady. Charlene was released from the holding cell within minutes. Her walk through the precinct was slow, deliberate. Eyes followed her like she was walking in dress whites on a warship. She stopped in front of Weller and Myers. For a long second she didn't speak. Then, cool and calm, she said, "You thought you had power. You thought your badge gave you permission. But I've been under real fire. I've stood in real battles. And men like you wouldn't last a day in them." Weller couldn't look her in the eye. Charlene turned to Tamika and offered her a nod of genuine respect. "Remember this," Charlene said, loud enough for the whole room. "Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't have to prove itself, but when it's tested, it shows up." And with that, she walked out into the morning sun, the brass glinting on her newly delivered Navy blazer. The war wasn't over, but the tide had already turned. Charlene Wade stood in front of her hotel mirror, her Navy uniform pressed sharp as a blade, every ribbon and insignia perfectly aligned. The weight of it all sat heavy on her shoulders, not from the fabric, but from the choices she had to make. She didn't come to North Haven, Illinois, to expose corruption. She had come to bury her aunt and quietly settle her affairs. But now the entire precinct was under federal review, and her name was splashed across every major news network. The Admiral who got dragged and beaten by local cops. The irony was suffocating. For most of her career, Charlene had operated in silence, keeping her identity guarded, the way black women in power must often do to move without friction. But now they had forced her hand. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the countless missed calls. Navy Public Affairs, Pentagon aides, veterans groups, even reporters pretending to be family. She wasn't ready to speak to the world yet. There was one call she needed to make first. She hit dial. "Admiral Wade." The voice on the other end was deep and gravelly. Retired Chief Master Sergeant Theo Maddox, her old mentor. "Chief," she said, her tone softer than it had been in days. "I need advice." Theo didn't hesitate. "You about to light a fire under their feet? I wasn't planning on it." But now, Charlene exhaled, now I'm thinking it's necessary. Theo chuckled. About time. She paused, conflicted. It'll get messy. That's what mops are for. Make 'em clean up what they spilled. Charlene ended the call with a quiet thank you and headed for the door. At that exact moment, inside the North Haven Police Department, Captain Lawrence Huxley was watching a closed-door briefing unfold on a monitor in his office. The two arresting officers, Weller and Myers, had been pulled from the floor pending investigation and were now scrambling to rewrite history. "Sir," Weller said, voice shaking slightly, "we thought she was someone else. There's a woman named Charlene Wade with a record. The system probably glitched." Captain Huxley didn't look convinced. His eyes were narrowed, arms folded across his chest. "There are over a dozen eyewitnesses, a dashcam recording, and security footage from the jail, and all of it shows you ignoring protocol, violently detaining a woman who made no threats, showed no resistance, and who is, in fact, a decorated admiral in the United States Navy." "She didn't say anything," Myers blurted. "She just stood there, acting like she owned the place." "She does own something now," Huxley said flatly. "Your careers." He turned toward the window, unwilling to meet their eyes again. "I'll be making my statement to the press today, and it won't be pretty." Back at her hotel, Charlene was greeted in the lobby by a reporter from the Chicago Tribune, a young woman named Lena Castro, who had been camped there for hours. "Admiral Wade," she called out gently, "do you have any comment on what happened?" Charlene stopped, studied her, then said, "Are you here to tell the truth or twist it?" Lena hesitated. "I was raised by a Gulf War vet. I don't twist stories about soldiers." Charlene nodded once. "One statement. Off the record." They stepped into a quiet alcove. "I didn't come here to make news," Charlene began. "But when the system doesn't protect you, sometimes you have to remind it who you are." Lena scribbled furiously in her notebook. "Are you planning legal action?" Charlene's eyes hardened. "I'm planning to wake people up." That night, Lena's article went viral. Though technically off the record, she quoted unnamed sources and painted Charlene as both hero and victim, laying out the contradictions of a country that salutes the flag while brutalizing the people who fight for it. The comment sections exploded. Half the country called for justice. The other half called it a setup. But the real twist hadn't arrived yet. The next day, during the internal affairs hearing at the police department, something unexpected happened. Officer Tamika Jones, the same one who called D.C., requested to testify. The room was small, windowless, and packed with tension. "I need to speak on the record," she said, her voice steady. Captain Huxley raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Tamika unfolded a document and laid it on the table. "I've seen these two officers, Weller and Myers, do this before, 5 times in the last 2 years, all to Black or Latino civilians. They falsified reports, used excessive force, and planted charges. Every time the department swept it under the rug." Huxley's face turned pale. "You have evidence?" one investigator asked. Tamika nodded. "I've been collecting it, and after what they did to Admiral Wade, I couldn't stay silent." She handed over a flash drive. Weller stood up, livid. "She's lying. She's been jealous of us for years." Tamika looked him dead in the eye. "Jealous of brutality? That's your legacy." The room erupted in whispers. Outside, Charlene watched through a glass pane in the hallway, hands behind her back, expression unreadable. This wasn't about just her anymore. It was about every silent file, every overlooked bruise, every buried complaint. And the war she thought she left on foreign soil had followed her home. As the hearing closed, Huxley stepped out to speak with Charlene directly. "We're moving to terminate both officers," he said quietly. "But this won't stop there. It's going statewide. Internal Affairs is requesting full audits." Charlene looked him in the eye. Good. It's about time someone cleaned house. Huxley hesitated. You planning to stay involved? Charlene didn't blink. Until it's done. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. Tell your department this, she added. The next time they think they're above accountability, they should remember my face. As she walked away, the echoes of her boots rang like warning shots. The game had changed, and the system that thought it could bury her was now under siege from the inside. Rain struck the streets of North Haven with a cold ferocity that mirrored the tension in the city's veins. News trucks lined up outside the police station like vultures, cameras aimed at the double doors, waiting for someone to step out and feed their narrative. But inside, Charlene Wade wasn't interested in spectacle. She was after the rot beneath the surface. She stood before a conference table surrounded by officials, including representatives from Internal Affairs, a Federal Oversight Committee, and the State Attorney General's office. Her navy dress uniform made her stand out in the room, but it was the fire in her eyes that held their attention. This is bigger than Weller and Myers, Charlene said. You've got a system that enables abuse and silences good officers who speak up. You think firing 2 men solves it? It doesn't. One of the officials, a gray-haired man named Daniel Robeson, leaned forward. With respect, Admiral, our investigation is ongoing, but the process takes time. Time is what victims of this department didn't have, Charlene snapped. One of them died in that holding cell. Don't think I haven't read every file. There was a pause. The air in the room tightened. A woman from the Attorney General's office, Maya Ellington, spoke next. We have evidence now, thanks to Officer Tamika Jones. That gives us leverage. But if you want systemic change, we'll need testimony from you, Admiral. On record. Publicly. Charlene's jaw flexed. You want me to be the face of this? We need a face they can't ignore, Maya said gently. Charlene didn't answer right away. Her silence wasn't fear, it was calculation. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the precinct, Officer Weller was pacing in the locker room, phone pressed tightly to his ear. I told you, he hissed. I didn't know who she was. On the other end was an old friend, someone with connections in city council. You're not going to make this go away screaming on a burner phone. You need leverage. I had leverage, Weller muttered. But she turned it into a weapon. You've got something else, don't you? You ever see her with anyone shady? Any intel from booking? Anything off? Weller hesitated. There was one thing. She made a call before she gave up her name. Quiet, controlled, used military code. I didn't catch the exact phrase, but I wrote down part of it. Send it to me. That night, while the world was dissecting Charlene's background and motives, Weller's contact ran the phrase through an old military intel database. And something pinged. Not only was Charlene a Navy admiral, she was previously stationed with a covert naval intelligence unit focused on corruption monitoring. Civilian corruption, domestic infiltration, high-level clearances. He leaned back in his chair, whistling. Oh, you didn't just arrest a high-ranking officer, he muttered. You arrested someone who hunts predators like you. At the same time, Charlene was in her aunt's old house, flipping through photo albums on the living room floor. The quiet clashed with the storm building outside. She paused on a faded picture, her aunt holding a younger Charlene at a protest march, fists raised high. Don't ever let them silence you, her aunt had said that day. If they can't silence you, they can't own you. Her phone buzzed. It was Theo again. You're all over the news, Wade. Let me guess, she said. Patriotic hero or angry threat? Both, depending on who you ask, but that's not why I called. You're being followed. Charlene's spine stiffened. How do you know? I pulled surveillance from 2 blocks near the station and your hotel. Same black SUV in both places. No license plates. Same guy watching you. Charlene's voice dropped low. Military-grade op or amateur hour? Hard to say, but someone's nervous. That usually means you're close. Charlene didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake, combing through old files, tracking every complaint filed against the North Haven PD over the last decade. Patterns emerged. Same names, same cover-ups, same excuses. By morning, she was ready. She walked into City Hall with a file in one hand and fire in her eyes. A special public hearing had been called in response to her case. Reporters packed the gallery. Activists filled the back rows. The mayor, flanked by legal counsel, sat behind a long desk, face unreadable. Charlene approached the mic. "My name is Admiral Charlene Wade, and I've served this country for 25 years. I've commanded fleets. I've navigated war zones, but the battlefield that broke me was right here, in my own country, in a jail cell built not for justice, but for fear." The room stilled. She opened the file. These are names of individuals who filed abuse complaints against officers Weller and Myers. Some of them were ignored. Some were silenced. One, a 17-year-old named Malik Harper, was found dead in custody. Gasps filled the chamber. "I am requesting that North Haven Police Department undergo a federal audit and external review, effective immediately." The mayor's face went pale. "And if that's not granted," she continued, "I will personally testify before Congress. I will name names. I will bring every receipt." The mayor leaned toward his mic, clearly shaken. "Admiral Wade, please understand, this is a process. We cannot rush." "No," Charlene interrupted. "You've already delayed justice for years. Now it's your turn to catch up." As she stepped back, the audience erupted in applause. But outside, a black SUV idled with the engine running, its driver watching her every move. In a quiet call to an unknown number, he simply said, "She's not backing down. Should we proceed?" The voice on the other end replied, "Not yet. Let's see how far she's willing to go." Back inside, Charlene didn't know she was being watched. But her gut told her something wasn't right. Still, for the first time in days, she felt something stronger than anger. Purpose. And she had no intention of stopping now. The early morning sun cast long shadows across North Haven's Civic Center, but Charlene Wade was already up, her hands wrapped around a cup of bitter black coffee in the city courthouse cafe. She had barely slept. Her instincts told her something was shifting. The public hearing the day before had gone viral, and while many cheered her bravery, others, those who felt threatened, had begun circling like sharks. Her phone buzzed. "Private number." She answered. "This is Admiral Wade." A pause, then a disguised voice spoke. "You've stirred a nest that's been sleeping for years. Watch your back. They don't just lose power, they destroy threats." The line went dead. Charlene stared at the screen for a beat, heart pounding, before slowly placing the phone down. The weight of her uniform felt heavier than usual today. She stood and made her way out of the cafe, eyes scanning every face. She was being followed, not just watched, tracked. Meanwhile, inside the North Haven PD headquarters, Officer Tamika Jones sat tensely across from Internal Affairs. Her face was pale but defiant. "You're accusing two senior officers of criminal conspiracy. Are you prepared to back that up in court?" the investigator asked. Tamika didn't blink. "Yes, and I'm not the only one." She slid a USB drive across the table. "This has voice recordings from the locker room. Weller bragging about breaking detainees to send a message. Myers joking about planting evidence. I kept quiet too long. I'm done." The room fell silent. Back at the courthouse, Charlene entered a small side room used for private legal consultations. Inside was Theo Calder, her longtime military attorney and now reluctant civilian advisor. He looked up from his notes, grim. "They're preparing to discredit you." Charlene raised an eyebrow. Of course they are. Theo continued. They've pulled records from your time in Bahrain. One incident, the classified one. They're leaking pieces of it out of context. Charlene's mouth tightened. That mission was sanctioned, every move documented. Not anymore. Someone scrubbed the internal database. It'll look like you went rogue unless we push back fast. Charlene leaned back, jaw clenched. Then we go louder. Outside, the mayor's office was buzzing. Mayor Linda Cordell stood by her window, watching protesters gather below with signs supporting Charlene. Her chief of staff, Raymond, approached with a look of discomfort. She's not going away, he said. Linda sighed. She's too clean. We can't discredit her without it blowing back on us. Then what do we do? She turned, voice low. We give the people a gesture, a concession. Sacrifice Weller and Myers. Announce an internal reform committee. Take some heat off. And Charlene? We invite her to co-chair. Frame it like unity. Raymond hesitated. And if she refuses? We paint her as uncooperative, too radical, too angry. At that same moment, Weller was back in the shadows. He'd been suspended, yes, but unofficially he was still pulling strings. From a private booth in a backroom bar frequented by former officers and local political fixers, he nursed a whiskey and glared at the headlines running across the TV. She's not just after us anymore, he muttered. She wants to burn it all down. A man sitting across from him, one of the mayor's former campaign funders, leaned in. You need to make her look unstable. Push the right story to the right people. The media doesn't need facts, just a spark. Weller grinned. I've got one. The next day, local news outlets exploded with a breaking headline. Admiral Wade involved in covert operation that left civilians dead? The smear campaign had begun. Charlene walked into Theo's office, the TV blaring with talking heads debating her morality. He turned it off with a grimace. Damage is already moving fast. Charlene said nothing. Instead, she placed a thick folder on his desk. It was stamped with naval seals, authenticated. I kept hard copies, originals. They can erase what they want from the system, but they can't erase the truth. He opened it, scanned the pages, and then smiled. This is gold. We release it tonight, she said. Full transparency. Let them try to spin that. But before they could act, her phone buzzed again. Another private number. She answered cautiously. Charlene Wade. A deep voice spoke. You're making enemies in places you can't see. And your friend Theo. He's next. She stood abruptly, panic in her chest. Who is this? You've been warned. Click. She turned to Theo, breath shallow. You need security, now. That night, as planned, they released the original documents to a national investigative journalist known for never backing down. The article went live by 10 p.m. By midnight, it had 4 million views. It confirmed Charlene's operation in Bahrain was legal, successful, and even commended internally until it was buried by politicians threatened by the corruption she uncovered. The public turned sharply. The smear began to crumble. But not everyone backed down. At sunrise, Charlene opened her hotel room door to find a note taped to it. One word. Stop. Under it, a bullet casing. She stared at it, unfazed, then picked up her phone and called Theo. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives, she said. Across town, Weller stormed into a parking garage, seething. But before he could reach his car, a black SUV screeched to a stop. 2 men in suits stepped out. Officer Daniel Weller, one said, flashing a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. You need to come with us. For what? Conspiracy, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. And that's just the first page. As Weller was shoved into the vehicle, the last thing he saw was a nearby billboard. It was Charlene's face. A headline above it read, "From survivor to leader, the woman who took on a broken system and won." But Charlene knew the real fight wasn't over. The people backing Weller ran deeper than any local force, and if she wanted true change, she'd have to take this to the very top. To Washington, to Congress, to the Pentagon. This was no longer about North Haven. It was about the soul of the system itself. Charlene stood at the edge of the Capitol steps, watching the city swirl around her like a hive. From up here, Washington, D.C. looked almost serene, its monuments towering, its streets organized. But beneath the surface, she could feel it. Tension, resistance, and fear from those who'd spent their careers protecting the system she was now threatening to expose. "You ready?" Theo asked, his voice tight as he adjusted his tie beside her. The man hadn't slept in 2 days, and it showed. "As I'll ever be," she replied. They entered the building, escorted by 2 federal marshals. Charlene had been called to testify in front of the Congressional Oversight Committee. Not as a witness, as a warning. She knew it the moment she saw the panel. Congressman Ray Nystrom, a seasoned politician whose face had been plastered across smear pieces for decades, sat at the center like a king behind a desk. His eyes held no warmth, just calculation. Charlene took her seat at the microphone. "We're here to address allegations of systemic abuse within local law enforcement and the potential overreach of a military officer intervening in civil matters," Nystrom said smoothly. "Admiral Wade, do you believe your actions in North Haven were justified?" She leaned forward, calm but firm. "I believe justice isn't optional. I didn't intervene. I responded to a constitutional failure. Officers beat me on a public street while I was in uniform, then tried to bury it. I stood up, not just for myself, but for every American who can't." Some murmurs rippled through the crowd behind her. Nystrom's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to defying local authority?" "I admit to upholding my oath." There was silence. Then Nystrom pressed a button and screens behind him lit up with distorted headlines, cropped footage, edited audio. "Do you deny being involved in a covert Navy operation in Bahrain that resulted in civilian casualties?" Charlene didn't flinch. "I deny the framing. That operation saved 32 American hostages and was fully authorized." Nystrom clicked again. Another screen lit up grainy footage of a chaotic street, blood, panic. "Is this you giving an order to fire?" Charlene stared at the footage, jaw tight. That video was doctored. The full version shows insurgents using civilians as human shields. I made a call that saved lives. It's easy to twist facts when you fear what I represent. And there it was, the turn. The committee didn't care about facts. They were building a narrative, painting her as unstable, dangerous, a threat to their control. Back in North Haven, the walls were closing in around Weller. He was out on bond, but surveillance footage, financial records, and now testimony from 2 other officers were all stacking against him. He paced inside his lawyer's office like a cornered animal. "You said this wouldn't stick. You said she'd back down," he growled. His attorney, a smug man named Boyd Keller, held up a hand. "There's still one option, a deal, if you flip on the others." "I'm not a rat. You're not a cop anymore either." Weller's jaw flexed. "No, I'm not. But I know people who owe me favors, people who can leak something big, something that'll blow all this sky high." He smiled darkly. "Let's see how they like it when the chaos isn't coming from me." Back in D.C. As Charlene exited the hearing room, a young black woman approached her in the hallway. She wore a navy blue suit and carried a clipboard. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say I watched you speak today. My brother was arrested 2 years ago for a crime he didn't commit. Watching you stand there, facing them down, gave me hope again." Charlene's guard softened. "What's your name?" Raya Ellis." Charlene smiled. "Raya, people like you are why I keep going." She shook her hand firmly and moved on. But moments later, a congressional aide rushed up behind her. "Admiral Wade, there's a problem." Charlene turned sharply. "What kind of problem?" "The Pentagon just issued a statement. They're disavowing your actions in North Haven, calling it a personal crusade and suspending your clearance." Charlene's breath hitched. "What?" Theo pulled out his phone and saw the notification flood in. It was everywhere. News outlets, social feeds. The Department of Defense had thrown her under the bus. "They're afraid," Theo muttered. "They're trying to isolate you, discredit you before your next step." Charlene stared down the hall, the noise of reporters behind her growing louder. "They won't succeed," she said. That night, in a quiet hotel room above the city, Charlene watched the headlines swirl. "Navy disavows Admiral Wade. She overstepped, says DOD, official unfit to serve." Theo sat across from her with two laptops open, emails flooding in. Some threats, some offers. One stood out. "Charlene, you need to see this." She leaned over. A whistleblower, a former DOD contractor offering documents proving a deeper cover-up. Weller wasn't acting alone. His orders may have been funneled through a rogue domestic intelligence unit, once tasked with controlling dissent in minority communities. Charlene's stomach dropped. This changes everything," she whispered. Theo nodded. "If this is real, we're not just exposing bad cops or corrupt politicians. We're about to blow the lid off a decades-old Black Ops division." Charlene stood up slowly. "Then we go public, not with a statement, with a full broadcast." Theo blinked. "You mean live?" "Yes, all of it. The people deserve to know." The next day, as the sun rose over D.C., Charlene sat down in front of a camera in a secure location. The broadcast went live on multiple platforms. She laid it all out: the attack, the cover-up, the federal betrayal, and finally the documents tying it to a secret domestic surveillance and suppression program. The feed was raw, unfiltered, human. By noon, it had over 10 million views, and by sunset, protests had begun again, bigger, louder, more united than before. But at the same time, somewhere in a dark control room, men in suits were watching her face on the screen. One of them leaned forward. "Activate Protocol Echo. If she wants war, she'll get it." Back in the studio, Charlene's phone lit up, a single message. "We're coming for you." She looked into the camera once more, breath steady, hands unshaken. "Let them come," she whispered, and the screen faded to black. The hotel room was dark, save for the soft glow of the television screen flickering silently in the background. Charlene sat at the edge of the bed, still in uniform, her jacket unbuttoned, her medals hanging like dead weight. Her phone lay in front of her on the nightstand. That one message kept replaying in her mind. "We're coming for you." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Theo was pacing the room, phone pressed to his ear, talking in hushed tones to a contact at the Justice Department. "You need to put her under federal protection, now. I'm not asking, I'm telling you she's not safe. You saw what happened after that broadcast." He hung up and turned to her. "Charlene, the DOJ says they're still reviewing the documents. But you've rattled every cage in D.C. If they weren't scared before, they're panicking now." She nodded slowly. "Good, let them panic." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just a political war anymore. It was personal and dangerous. Hours later, Charlene was escorted by a small detail of trusted federal marshals to a temporary safe house just outside the city. It was a modest two-story home on a quiet street in Silver Spring. Normal. Too normal. Theo sat beside her at the kitchen table, reviewing footage on his laptop. 3 different sources just confirmed something we didn't see coming, he said. Weller wasn't acting rogue. There's an internal unit called Sigma Corps, black budget, buried under layers of intel. And guess who signs off on their ops? Charlene looked up. Nystrom? No. Higher. He spun the laptop around. There on the screen was the face of Admiral Stanley Greaves, her old superior. A man who had mentored her, praised her, promoted her. No, that's impossible, she whispered. I thought so too, Theo said, but he signed off on every op Sigma Corps ran in domestic territory, including surveillance and control of minority protests, activist leaders, and most recently, you. Charlene's hands curled into fists. He used me. He used all of us. Charlene stood up, her jaw tight. Then it's time he answered for it. The next morning, she walked into the Pentagon unannounced. The guards at the gate stiffened, but her ID still worked. Her clearance hadn't been fully revoked yet. It was only suspended. Greaves hadn't expected her to walk through the front door. That was his mistake. She stormed into his office. He was sitting behind his desk, perfectly calm, sipping coffee like it was just another day. Charlene, he said, smiling thinly, I wondered when you'd show up. I trusted you, she said coldly. I never asked you to. You mentored me. I needed a black face with medals and a clean record. You fit the profile, gave our operations cover, but you got too loud. Charlene slammed her palms on his desk. You authorized an illegal unit that targeted civilians on American soil. You think you're the first person to discover something uncomfortable about your country. We do what we must to preserve order. Charlene leaned in. You're going to testify, publicly. You're going to tell the world what you've done. Greaves chuckled. You don't get it. This machine runs on silence. You break it, it'll crush you. I've already broken it, she said. And it's not just me anymore. People are watching, listening, marching. He stood, walked around his desk, and looked her in the eye. You walk out that door, you'll never wear that uniform again. You'll lose your pension, your security, your legacy. Charlene's voice was calm but laced with fire. Then I'll build a new one. As she turned to leave, Greaves called out, If I go down, I won't be the only one. Charlene glanced over her shoulder. You're right. A lot of people are going to fall. That's the point. Outside the Pentagon, protesters were beginning to gather again, signs held high, faces determined. News vans were circling like vultures, sensing a storm. That afternoon, Charlene held a press conference on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The location wasn't accidental, it was symbolic. She stood behind a single podium, flanked by veterans, whistleblowers, and families of victims. Her voice echoed across the crowd and through every live stream in the country. We are not just fighting corruption. We are fighting a culture that protects abusers and punishes truth-tellers. But we are not afraid. I stand here not just as a Navy admiral. I stand here as a citizen. As a daughter, as someone who believes that no uniform, no badge, no office is above the law. The crowd roared. At that exact moment, in a high-rise building downtown, Weller was watching the speech on TV with 2 other men members of Sigma Corps. You said she'd fold, one of them hissed. Weller clenched his jaw. She didn't. She's naming names. She's getting traction. Weller's phone buzzed. A message. New warrant. Federal. A knock at the door. FBI, open up! Weller's world collapsed in one heartbeat. The agents stormed in. Files were seized. Laptops confiscated. Weller was handcuffed and dragged out in front of the press. Charlene's face was still playing on the screen behind him as he was shoved into the back of the van. Back at the memorial, Charlene received the news through her earpiece. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply nodded and said, "This is just the beginning," and the crowd erupted again. But deep in the bowels of the Capitol, in an underground meeting room, Nystrom slammed a file shut. "She's too loud and too clean. We need something, anything." Another aide slid him a photo, an old classified image, blurred, from a Navy operation overseas. This might be it. Nystrom stared at it. "If we can't silence her, we'll destroy her credibility." He picked up his phone. "Let's leak it." And with that, the next storm began to form. But Charlene Wade wasn't done fighting. She was just getting started. The photo hit the internet like a lightning strike. It was grainy, taken years ago during a classified Navy op in a foreign desert. But the media didn't care. They cared that it showed Charlene Wade, dressed in tactical gear, standing near a collapsed structure. The headline was written to inflict maximum damage. Navy Admiral linked to civilian casualties in covert operation. Cable news anchors were already spinning narratives. Was she a hero or a hidden threat? Online trolls had a field day. Charlene's integrity, built on years of service, was under siege. She stood in her apartment, eyes locked on the TV, jaw clenched. The truth didn't matter right now, only the story being sold to the public. And they were buying it. Theo burst in. "They're saying it was an unauthorized strike, that civilians died, that you covered it up." Charlene didn't look away from the screen. "That mission was sanctioned. We extracted a kidnapped American diplomat. No civilians were harmed." "They don't care," Theo said. "They're not after facts. They're after your voice." A knock at the door interrupted them. Charlene opened it to find a woman holding a worn manila folder. "You don't know me," the woman said, "but my brother served with you. That op in the photo, he was there." Charlene stared at her. "Who are you?" "Serena McIntyre. My brother's name was Marcus. He died in that mission. Not because of you, because the command delayed evac. He wrote everything down. They tried to bury it." She handed over the folder. Inside was a journal, letters, reports. First-hand proof that the mission had been sabotaged from above. Greaves again, and the man who pulled the trigger on the delay? Senator Nystrom's chief of staff, back when he was in naval intelligence. Charlene's hands trembled as she held the documents. "This changes everything," she whispered. Within hours, Theo coordinated a secure briefing with the Department of Defense and the Attorney General. Charlene walked in holding the folder like a loaded weapon. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She read Marcus McIntyre's last letter aloud. In it, he described her as the kind of leader you follow into the fire because she walks through it with you. When she finished, the room was silent. The Attorney General nodded slowly. "We're reopening the investigation, and this time it won't be buried." Later that night, Charlene sat on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial again. This time there were no lights, no crowd, just her and Theo. The silence was welcome. "You know," Theo said, "you could walk away now. Let the system handle itself." Charlene shook her head. "If I walk away, they'll erase everything we've done. We don't need another symbol. We need a movement." A movement had already started. All across the country, young people were marching. Veterans were speaking out. Whistleblowers came forward. People weren't just watching anymore. They were acting. Weeks later, Nystrom was subpoenaed. Weller was indicted. Greaves resigned in disgrace. Sigma Corps was dismantled and publicly denounced. It was far from perfect justice, but it was something. Charlene stood before Congress, not as a defendant, but as a witness. She told her story. She exposed every lie. And when she walked out, reporters yelled questions, hoping for a headline. She gave them one. Truth takes longer than lies, but it always gets there. At a public town hall weeks later, a young black girl approached her, maybe 9 years old, hair in braids, bright eyes. "Are you really a Navy Admiral?" the girl asked. Charlene knelt down and smiled. "Yes, and you can be one too." The girl beamed. As Charlene stood, cameras flashed, capturing the moment. But the smile on her face wasn't for them. It was for the future. Because the story wasn't just about her. It was about every woman told she was too loud. Every soldier asked to fight for a country that didn't always fight for them. Every voice that had been silenced and had finally found the courage to speak. So, to every viewer out there, if this story moved you, if it made you feel seen or gave you hope, do one thing. Share it. Subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories others won't. Stories that matter. Stories that spark change. And remember, one voice can shake the system, but 1,000 can tear it down.